one of the things that I learned from doctors during COVID was that what upended them in the experience was not the disease. They're familiar with contagious disease. And thanks to AIDS, they had a lot of processes that they had put in place. But what unnerved them was the constant change in procedure. That one day it was do this, the next day it was do that. And what I've learned from people who deal with the stress centers environments, these crisis environments, what is vital is shared processes and procedures that you've trained for, that you know like the back of your hand. That there's no improvisation in the stress center. And I think that if I watch successful money managers, they have experience, they have process, they have a routine, and so they don't improvise. They're not impulsive. They're not emotional. It's a go around, and that enables them to look objectively and to say, okay, we need to change this now because conditions have changed, but we've done this before. And so it's a very unemotional response. And this is where I think knowing that you're in the stress center, just simply being able to say, oh, I'm here, enables you to step back to say, okay, now is not the time to be impulsive and emotional, which I'm going to be inclined to do, but to realize that that all that I'm feeling, all that the crowd is feeling, that the market is feeling, is a function of its location and nothing more.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on the show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. My guest today is Peter Atwater. He's a Wall Street veteran and the author of the wonderful book, The Confidence Map. We're talking about everything from investing and navigating the financial crisis to what it takes to be a successful money manager. We're learning from airplane pilots, pandemic-era doctors, and more. Peter proposes an eye-opening framework, a map that has already helped me in my professional life in many ways, and I think it could guide you in your endeavors as well. I'm very excited to share this conversation with you. Please help me welcome Peter Atwater. Hello, Peter. How are you? It's so nice to see you again.
I'm doing great, Bogomol. It's wonderful to talk to you.
So we have to thank Matt Ziegler, who introduced us, and we had a wonderful discussion, a pretty long discussion, I think about a month ago, and a lot has changed since. And as I told you, I don't like to timestamp the episodes because I see them as an evergreen content that people can discover. But it's interesting that so much has happened since the last time we spoke, and I'll bring it up that we almost lost one presidential candidate. The other one decided not to run, and we have some jitters in the market. So I'm sure it will come up in this conversation. We can't escape it. But before we get there, and before we get to your book, The Confidence Map, that I really loved and I want to talk about a lot, I want to start from the very beginning, if you indulge me. I'm very curious about your childhood upbringing and how you think that early time shaped you and shaped your particular curiosity and career down the road.
Sure. So I grew up in a suburb of New York, and my dad was an engineer, worked for a global engineering firm. And initially, we lived a very classic suburban life. And then when I was in middle school, we moved much further out in New Jersey to a place where probably half of my high school went back to the farm and others moved on. But then, as I was ending my junior year of high school, my dad got transferred. And so I spent my senior year of high school in France, in Paris, going to the American school. And if I think about my own experience in the world, there's this widening of the lens. And if I think about sort of the things that shape my life today, it is a lot of that wide lens. That what I've come to appreciate is that we see pieces of it, but we don't see all of it. And in the work that I do, I try to go as wide as I possibly can to look at what's happening politically, socially, and trying to connect those with what's happening in the markets. Why do things happen now? Because if I can begin to understand that, then I can start to see the bigger picture at large.
I love that, and I can relate to that. You know that I was born in Poland. I went to schools around Europe, and I came to New York, and you were in Paris, going to an American school, seeing the world from the outside in a different way. And I think it stays with us. We get to see the world from various perspectives, and when just one perspective is proposed to us, we want to step away and ask, what else are we missing? And I think that's the essence of your book and how you look at the world. I do want to ask you about a particular point in your career that you share in your book, that you were there when the housing market was about to collapse. And everybody thought, oh, it's just the housing market. But then we learned that it brought down the entire economy and the stock market and all asset prices. Can you talk about that period? You were involved. And from what I could tell in your book, you saw it coming.
Yeah, I saw it coming. And a little background for your audience. I mean, I had helped to develop JP Morgan's asset-backed securities business. I'd been a bank treasurer. I'd worked closely with the rating agencies and the regulators. So I knew how the system worked, and I was watching the system be abused. And that, particularly in the securitization space, the willingness and ability of mortgage bankers and investment banks to stuff anything they could possibly find that looked like a mortgage into a security and sell it. And that, to me, just raised all sorts of concerns. But I'd learned a lot dealing with a lot of troubled banks in my career. And one of the things that I've figured out along the way is that there is this LIFO quality to bubbles, that the most outrageous, horrific characters show up at the very tail end of the bubble. And it's like they run to the bar and they grab whatever bottle of whiskey they can find and start to chug it. There's this frenzied effect. But they're then the first ones to perish. And so when I was seeing all this discussion about subprime mortgages and the fact that subprime mortgages are contained, I was like, no, you're missing the point. It's not that they're contained that matters. It's that they're first.
Right.
And so if confidence continues to fall, it's going to be the Alt-A mortgages that begin to struggle. Then it's going to be the prime mortgages that struggle. And so the collapse actually was very systematic and followed confidence along. It was, when Lehman Brothers failed, it was where confidence was at its lowest point.
It was a fascinating time where everything seemed to be fine until it wasn't fine. And it's interesting how those things happen not really gradually. There's a gradual build-up. I called it in one of the articles that I wrote that we take the escalator up and the elevator down. It always feels like it builds up, but then it's a shock and it just drops. And I'm thinking of March 2020. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what we don't appreciate is the tipping points don't have to be significant.
Right.
And you think about all of the things, all the conversations that Joe Biden has had, but it was a single debate that brought about this massive change in outlook. During COVID, it was, when Tom Hanks and his wife got COVID and Rudy Gobert and the Utah Jazz, suddenly those two events happening on the same night tipped the scales.
It's fascinating. And once we lose it, it's very hard to recover it. I want to share a quote from your book and talk more about it. You say early in your book, I believe there is a single deciding factor that underpins the important choices we make and will make ahead. You place one word, you say confidence. Can you talk about it? It sets the stage for the entire book that we're going to dive into.
Yeah, so I think that is the single largest factor. That is the invisible hand that grips us at all times. But I want to be clear that when I talk about confidence, I mean it in a slightly different way than most people use it and think about it. Folks tend to think about it in terms of self-confidence or self-esteem. What I care about is two things: the certainty we feel, the degree to which the world around us, the thing we're doing, feels predictable, and then our level of control within that. It's one thing to know that the road ahead is straight. It's another thing to know that you can drive the car on that road. And so we need both of those to feel confident.
We'll come back to that, but I like the sound of it. You also set the stage by sharing that feelings of vulnerability drive much of our decision making, and made me really pause, because then you say we are all but programmed to attempt to restore certainty and control in our lives when we lost them. And sometimes the path we take is not the best path. That's what I wanted to add. But
yeah.
But we want to get back to safety as soon as possible.
Yeah, so once I had figured out this definition of confidence, I had to think about, well, what's the opposite? And there it was, okay, so when we feel uncertain and we feel a significant level of powerlessness, what's that experience? And ultimately, I concluded that that's when we feel vulnerable. That when we feel vulnerable, things don't seem right, and we doubt whether we can handle them. And suddenly, it became clear why losses feel more intense than gains. That gains make us feel more confident, but losses make us feel vulnerable. And we abhor vulnerability more than we crave confidence. It's not a symmetric feeling. And you hear that when when somebody feels vulnerable, the first question we ask is something wrong? What's the problem?
Right.
So that to me is really telling, and just how we socialize those feelings of vulnerability. But to your point, our solutions are not always the best because they're focused on restoring certainty and control now, whatever it takes. And we're not paying much attention to the longer term consequences of those decisions.
It's fascinating because what I'm hearing is that we're not really built to think long term. And there's a certain contradiction here, because in the world of investing, we really get compensated for waiting. But the way the markets are set up, they're set up for short-term participation. The fact that we have a price discovery day to day, you and I were briefly talking before I hit record that we had a few tough days for the market, and I'm sure we'll come back in this conversation. So the market discovers the price every day, but we're not really built to withstand that pain as we go. We would rather just either get out or not participate until it's fun again, right?
Yeah, but it's not that we're necessarily short-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
We're short-sighted when confidence is low.
Mm-hmm.
We are woefully too long-sighted when confidence is high. You know, think about how people envision AI today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're using 50-year models. They're looking at everything as far out into the future as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is that our sense of time is entirely correlated to how we feel. When confidence is high, I think I can see forever into the future and perfectly. And when it's low, there's no tomorrow.
Fascinating. So it's a moving target. I have a question about the time horizon. I want to explore it more. I really like that. You're right that there are times when we are very short-term thinking and then very long-term in other times. I want to come back to that. But before that, there was one more building block in your book early on that I do want to highlight that really made me think. You write about the unconventional interdisciplinary exploration, but you also propose and set aside the questions of causation, correlation, coincidence. And you have a better way of making sense of things. I think we're so obsessed if A happened, then B will follow. And I think even articles, I was reading articles this morning that are trying to explain what happened yesterday and what's happening today when the market is recovering a little bit. And there's already a story and a narrative. We're trying to find, tell me why, I have to know why. But in life, sometimes, from what I'm reading in your book, we don't have to know the exact A, B, C, D. We kind of holistically understand that this leads to what's about to happen. Can you explain it? I think you have a better way of explaining it that I'm doing right now.
Yeah, so you and I are talking the day after a major move down in the market. And I always chuckle because by the time the day is done, there is such a clear story as to why it's happened that I step back and go, so why didn't we see that coming, folks? Why was it that today the excuse is absolutely clear to everybody, but nobody saw it yesterday coming? No. So I struggle, economists, market folks, we obsess about, what caused this to happen.
Right.
And if I think about our own behaviors, we cannot distinguish action from reaction.
True.
So that inability makes it all but impossible to create a clear causal chain. But at the same time, I know that if you feel a particular way, I have a pretty good sense of what your story is and what you're likely to do next. And so that's the relationship I care about, is this equilibrium that exists between stories, feelings, and actions, because that's a much better lens than trying to spend your time figuring out which was chicken or egg. I don't care. I just know that at all times there is a constant equilibrium between how you feel, your stories, and your actions. And that's really a useful tool to establish what could happen next.
I think it's a brilliant way of looking at things. It's much more relaxed than trying to say, because this happened, then this has to happen. And the rates will go up, then the market will go down, and all those things that we try to simplify. The world is much more complicated than that. It's much more in motion from what I'm reading in your book.
Yeah, and we're going to disregard things that don't fit with our story, and we're going to absorb and be drawn to things that are. And so narrative, to me, is much more important than any piece of economic data, because we're driven by the stories we link to the data. I always love after the labor report, numbers are hot, cold, warm. It's God is in the adjectives.
But it continues to change. What I've learned investing for the last 20 years, managing money for families, patient capital, is that those forecasts are, the number of them is unlimited. Things come up all the time. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody's looking for a profit right after something happened. That's why there's a couple of articles already today, how, look, somebody already knew that this is happening or that's about to happen. We're looking for the Messiah that will save us here and tell us exactly what will happen next. But that's not really how investing works, and I'm sure we'll dive more into it in a minute. I do want to bring up a story from your book that really resonated with me, because you bring up a book that your parents bought you. I think your dad bought it for you. It was a super-sized National Geographic atlas, and I had one of those, believe it or not. Massive, and I was too little to flip the pages, and I loved that book, and you had it too. And your dad traveled a lot, and you wanted to follow him in the book. Can you tell about that book, and let's transition from that, how that book really created in my mind, foundation for the framework of the confidence quadrant that the book is all about, basically mapping out our journey.
Yeah, so there is, as you pointed out, National Geographic at one point published a atlas that's probably 2 by 3 feet closed. Big. It covers the entire kitchen table when you open it up. And as a kid, initially, we would play sort of a Where's Waldo? Where's Dad today? It's, Dad is here. He's on page 86. And that became a useful thing, just, to know where he was. But as my brother and sister and I grew, there was context to it. If Dad was in Dubai, that meant he was in the Middle East, which meant that you had this region. And from the stories he would tell, I knew what they wore, what the temperature was like, what was part of the culture, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat, the things you could do, the things you couldn't do. And so a location became shorthand for a much broader reference to culture. And it meant that when you turned the page, suddenly you were in a different culture, and a different culture that had different languages and clothing and stories and heritage to it. And when I was coming up with my framework, that became a really useful background to me, because suddenly I realized that depending on the mix of certainty and control that we had, that is to say, if I put certainty on an x-axis and control on a y-axis, now I know, well, if you're in the lower left-hand corner where you have no certainty and control, well, that's like being in this place called hell. And you feel this, and you're going to do that, and you're going to, it's going to look like this. And so it enabled me not only to talk about how people behaved in specific locations, but to show that when you moved locations, what was so different and why.
I love that story, and it's fascinating how an experience from your childhood paved the way for organizing your thoughts in a certain way. Can we quickly go over the 4 different parts of the quadrant so the audience knows what it's all about, and then we'll dive into the different parts, but just so that we know what the landscape could be like.
Sure. So if you take certainty and control, put certainty as the x-axis, control as the y-axis, and then think about them in degrees, high and low. Mm-hmm. So you have low certainty, low control, high control. And that enables you to create a 2x2 box chart. Mm-hmm. And while it's simplistic, it really does cover all of our moments in life. Mm-hmm. We love the upper right-hand box where we have high certainty and high control. I call that the comfort zone. Why? Mm-hmm. Because we're relaxed. Things feel easy. There's a fluency to what we do. Mm-hmm. We're nice to ourselves. We're nice to others. It's where we love to be. And so when we talk about getting outside of our comfort zone, what we're really saying is, I'm introducing uncertainty, I'm introducing a sense of powerlessness, or I'm introducing both. And if I introduce both, then I'm putting you in the lower left-hand corner. Mm-hmm. And I call that the stress center. Because anytime we don't have certainty and control, we're anxious. Anxiety is the symptom of those feelings of powerlessness and uncertainty. We're impatient. We're not necessarily nice to ourselves or others. Mm-hmm. And this is where dramatic events in history tend to happen, because our behavior there tends to be highly emotional and highly impulsive. When we think about confidence, we think about those 2 boxes, moving from the stress center to the comfort zone and back. But then there are these 2 other boxes, which to me are where really unusual and interesting things in our lives happen. So I'll talk about the lower right-hand box, where we have certainty but no control. Mm-hmm. And I know you're a pilot, so you as a pilot may have certainty and control when you get on a plane and are seated in the cockpit, but everybody else, they're powerless.
True.
But what they hope they have, what is imperative if you are Boeing and manufacturing planes, is that people have intense certainty. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, then suddenly they feel like they're in the stress center. But appreciate that an environment of intense certainty but powerlessness also defines a maximum security prison. Mm-hmm. And so those feelings, if you think about somebody on a roller coaster, I hate roller coasters. They feel like a prison to me. Uh-huh. But if you love the powerlessness paired with certainty, then it feels fun and energizing to you. So the passenger seat is an environment where you're either the beneficiary or the victim of what happens around you.
I like that.
The last box is what I call the launch pad, where we have control, but we have no certainty. Mm-hmm. And investors don't realize this, but that's where every financial decision is made. Mm-hmm. Whether I'm borrowing, lending, investing, they all happen for a moment in that launch pad. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs love that box. And this is where, again, our feelings change how we feel about it. Entrepreneurs look at uncertainty as opportunity. The rest of us look at it as a means to an end. Uh-huh. So I'll accept the uncertainty for a moment, but please don't make me last there forever. I need to either get back to the comfort zone, because if I don't, then I'm going to fall down into the stress center. And real life moves us around.
It's so fascinating because on one hand, there's the static view of the 4. And I know that you talk to people and they come up to you and they tell you where they think they are with different aspects of their life. And I found it fascinating. You're sharing all those stories in the book. On the other hand, you introduce this dynamic view of this map that you could be moving or about to move from one place to the other, including you share a story that I will never forget, because sometimes I'm a pilot, but sometimes I'm a passenger on the plane. I did share a story with you last time we spoke, how I was on a flight, lesser known airline that I won't mention here, but we had a problem with the landing gear. It wouldn't close. And I closed my eyes. I was already comfortable, very happy in my passenger seat. No control, but pretty certain I'm getting there on time. We left on time until the pilot announced that we're turning around because of the open landing gear. The drag is too much. He would burn too much fuel. We have to come back. And my evening and my night changed. And also, I think my brain chemistry and my body reaction, my emotional journey was completely different. I felt like I'm not so sure where this evening is going. I did have a feeling that as long as the landing gear is open, we can land. That peace of mind I had, but I was definitely jolted from one place to the other. Peter, I want to ask you about a legend. Like each map has a legend. And I was thinking, and I'm listening to you and I was reading your book, how do I know where I am? Right? Like I wake up or I'm in a situation, I'm making a decision. Where am I on this map? And I feel like the emotion and the feeling is the best guide to start with, to realize, where am I? Am I feeling very comfortable or I'm feeling extremely uncomfortable? Can you talk about that? But it looks like the feelings tell us, the emotions we experience tell us where we are on that map.
Yeah, the feelings of powerless, the feelings of uncertainty. You can also tell by the stories. Mm-hmm. What stories are you telling yourself? How do you perceive the future? Mm-hmm. And also, am I feeling impatient, or am I feeling a sense of calm in terms of time? You could even do a cognitive test. Does today feel like I'm counting by twos? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12? Or is today one of those days where it feels like I'm counting by 17s? That everything feels hard and laborious, because those are going to give you a sense. When I was talking to a psychologist about cognitive ease, he talked about the sense of fluency, and I think of fluency in terms of learning a second language, but I love that sense of fluidity. That when we feel confident, there is a sense that things are flowing. And when I talk to athletes and they talk about being in the zone, they're very quick to use words that suggest, this flow state of motion. And so to the extent that we're struggling cognitively, that's telling us how we feel in terms of confidence. I know we think of confidence as being bold and hands out right and sort of this performance of confidence, but at its core, it's cognitive, and cognitive ease equals confidence.
I like that. I'll be thinking about it. When you said the second language, so English is not my mother tongue, but I don't remember learning it. I learned it so early. I don't remember not being able to speak it, but I learned other languages. And definitely early on, when you're learning a language, it engages you fully just to put a sentence together. You don't know where the words will come from, and there are a lot of words that are missing, and I just want to say it this way. So it's a huge effort, and it's definitely not a comfort zone. And then you speak a language that you're very comfortable speaking, and it just happens. It flows. So you don't know where the words come from, how did it happen, and it just flows and it happens. I want to bring up the passenger seat, because in your book and in our conversation you bring up that clients of investment firms find themselves in the passenger seat in many ways. Can you talk about it? They surrender control to somebody who they trust, and they feel pretty certain that they're taken care of. But I thought it was a very interesting visual for an aspect of the investment profession.
Yeah, so I think if there's an underappreciated aspect in the change in the investment cycle, it is the shift from brokerage to asset management. Mm-hmm. Brokerage is active. Mm-hmm. If you're calling a broker, if you're trading, you're moving into the launch pad.
Right.
And so the choice that has been made has been your choice. Mm-hmm. Now you're in the passenger seat. Mm-hmm. And you could think of it almost as being in a restaurant, where you are being served, or you've hired a lawyer. The passenger seat is a place where we go when we hire experts who we believe have skills that we don't have. When the pipe bursts, I can go to the passenger seat and call the plumber, or I can go to Home Depot and Lowe's and find the part and see if I can make a repair, move to the launch pad. So very different business models. But one of the consequences is that we get angry when things go wrong at the person we chose. That person has disappointed us. They oversalted the meal. They added too much risk to my portfolio. And I don't think asset managers fully appreciate that they are in the trust business, that their job is to now keep certainty high in a market that doesn't always afford that. And so your mindset as an asset manager needs to be, how do I allow there to be a tolerable level of turbulence that the client always stays in the passenger seat, but never experiences the stress center? Because if the client moves into the stress center, I have failed, and they will fire me.
I think it's a wonderful reminder, and it's very fresh, because yesterday we had a bad day for the market, and it's still on my mind. But when the market closed, I sat down, and I wasn't watching it all day. I was doing other things, but I thought, I'll write a short email to my clients. And I usually write quarterly updates, but I thought I'll write something short explaining what I'm thinking about, what's going on. But it was a very calm and steady, just my usual style, how this shall pass, basically. And I sent it out to clients, and within a few minutes, most of them responded. And then I heard from the other ones, and they said, of course, we've been through this with you. But still, they appreciate that I sent something. It's like that pilot that goes on and says, it's normal, it's bumpy, but it's normal, it's part of it. But you need to hear it as much as you think you can handle it on your own.
Yeah, you do. I mean, and if you've ever been on an aborted landing where suddenly you think you're, about to touch down and the plane goes, feels all but vertical. Uh-huh. You don't hear anything from the pilot until things have calmed down. Mm-hmm. And as you might imagine, the pilot is focused on doing the job, not, hey, this is going on. Mm-hmm. And so that lack of information sends our minds spinning to think mm-hmm. about all of the potential possibilities. Mm-hmm. And how reassuring it is to hear them say, no, this is fine. One of the things I did was to actually interview pilots about their experience with an aborted landing. And I love the fact that, well, that's what we call it in the back of the plane. They call it a go-around. Exactly. And it's something, that. You prepare for it, you train for it, you talk about it. And so for them, it's Tuesday. It's mm-hmm. nothing out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. And we as passengers should take a great deal of comfort in that. Mm-hmm. But in the moment, our mind is spinning wildly out of control because mm-hmm. that's how we feel.
Because it's unfamiliar, because you don't know what's happening. No, I love that. I did so many go-arounds flying, and when I would be with my instructor, he would say, it's your call if you're going to complete the landing or not. You can always go around. And he would let me mess up the landing instead of telling me what to do. And I feel like it's very, very important. And confidence is such a powerful word. You talked about, self-confidence, but the ability to know that you can make the decision and go through with it. It's so important. I feel like flying taught me quite a bit about investing itself, because there are moments where we can all ponder if this is a good idea or not, but who will actually go and buy it? I sat in meetings when there was 20 of us, and we checked all the facts, we read the filings, we talked to the management, but then I knew from people's faces right away who will actually go and buy it or not. Like, you could tell. And buying is half the story, if maybe 1/3 of the story, but actually holding on to it, especially through the bumpy times, that's where you actually make money and make a difference. Peter, I want to ask you about a story you share in your book, and it's about doctors during COVID. I grew up in a household with 2 physicians, with 2 doctors, and I spent a lot of time running to the hospital seeing them because they work so much. The only time to see them, it would be me bringing sandwiches to my dad and sitting in his room as he was running between different commitments. So that was my... So I know how doctors operate, and I feel like you brought up a story about COVID, how, and there's a quote from your book, you say that doctors aren't afraid to change their course of action. And it made me really pause and stop, because I thought this is so true from my observation of my parents working, but also from the investment profession I'm in, that you say you do certain things, you have a blueprint, you have a strategy, but you might have to course correct at times. And you have to reserve the right permission to do that. Can you talk about it? I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, doctors have a liberty that investment managers don't have. Mm-hmm. The patient arrives to them sick, wounded. They didn't contribute in any way to that experience. Mm-hmm. Their whole job is to eliminate the vulnerability and uncertainty of the patient. Mm-hmm. And so they don't spend any of their time concerned about what happened and why, mm-hmm. as much as this is the patient now. Mm-hmm. And so their entire focus is the present into the future. If there's relevant information from the past, great, but most of the time they don't really care. It's like, okay, you're here, this is where we are. And so they don't have any baggage connected to what brought you to the ER. Their whole focus is, okay, what do we do from here? And if you watch them, they're very matter of fact about all of the bad. There's no withholding of a piece of critical information. Client has low blood pressure, high blood pressure. They're going to put all the bad out there. And in a very matter-of-fact way. There's no sugarcoating what's going on if you listen closely. And with that information, then they quickly come up with a prognosis and act to address it. And if the patient doesn't respond as they anticipate, then it's like, okay, forget that, we're on to the next. And they're not sitting there, thinking, oh, that was a bad choice. They're like, okay, that wasn't the correct choice for where we are. They're not being critical of their response in that moment. They're continue to focus in the future. They know that eventually there may be an assessment afterwards, but there's no time in the moment for, the sort of twisting and turning and the self-flagellation that you see among investment managers who are still struggling with the fact that they caused, in their mind, this to happen. Right. Not appreciating that, no, what you did was you decided to be the beneficiary or the victim of what others do. And that's a big group. That's management, it's other shareholders, it's regulators. There are a lot of people who control your fate in the passenger seat as an investment professional. That's why I always say, you need to care much more about how others feel than you do how you feel as an asset manager, because your fate is in their hands.
I really like that. I say that I want to know the clients and I want to know the businesses that I own. But I do realize that on one hand, I'm earning somebody's trust. I turn around and I want to have somebody provide that kind of experience to me. So if I invest in a business, they earn my trust that I can commit my capital for my clients into those businesses for a longer period of time. But it is true that you pay a lot of attention how everybody else is feeling, and you might pause and think about how you feel. The idea of course correcting really spoke to me, because I feel like in the investment profession, it's so easy to get a bit stuck when everybody assumes that you're going to do something. We're watching Warren Buffett, what he will do, won't do, right? And he's so watched. I don't think he cares that he's so watched, but it can get into your head. And you might not do something because this is something not like you. And that's why I focus a lot on the principles and the philosophy. And I say, don't watch particular actions because I might change my mind about this investment, right? The principles and the philosophy are set in stone, what kind of investments I will make. But the individual actions, just like that doctor at the ER, they can move around and switch and change as I have to adapt to an ever-changing situation. I feel like we confuse the two. And we feel like if the principles and the philosophy are set in stone, then your actions should be set in stone. But it's not the case. You might want to sell something or buy more of something because the world continues to evolve in front of you. I thought it was really empowering.
One of the things that I learned from doctors during COVID was that what upended them in the experience was not the disease. They're familiar with contagious disease. And thanks to AIDS, they had a lot of processes that they had put in place. But what unnerved them was the constant change in procedure. That one day it was do this, the next day it was do that. And what I've learned from people who deal with the stress centers environments, these crisis environments, what is vital is shared processes and procedures that you've trained for, that you know like the back of your hand, that there's no improvisation in the stress center. And I think that if I watch successful money managers, they have experience, they have process, they have a routine, and so they don't improvise. They're not impulsive. They're not emotional. It's a go around. And that enables them to look objectively and to say, okay, we need to change this now because conditions have changed, but we've done this before. And so it's a very unemotional response. And this is where I think knowing that you're in the stress center, just simply being able to say, oh, I'm here, enables you to step back to say, okay, now is not the time to be impulsive and emotional, which I'm going to be inclined to do, but to realize that that all that I'm feeling, all that the crowd is feeling, that the market is feeling, is a function of its location and nothing more.
Function of its location. I think it's very, very important to know that the market can be, and we know that, overtaken by fear and greed at different times, or panic and enthusiasm, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, and you can see it at the other extreme. Go back and look at early 2021, SPACs, NFTs, all those meme coins. I mean, it was, you could see unquestionably that the crowd was in the upper right-hand corner of the stress center, of the comfort zone. They felt invincible. And so all of those decisions perfectly fit with their stories and feelings.
I want to explore this in 1 second, but I just wanted to bring up the fact that when you talk about pilots and doctors, in many of those professions, there's a certain procedure and a checklist. And the checklist, it doesn't mean that it will cover everything. The checklist allows you to cover the essentials, and then you can be present and respond to what's in the moment. But the checklist kind of gets out of the way all the obvious things. So if you have some sort of an emergency, you go down the checklist, is it this? And then when all of those are out of the way, let's see what else could it be and how I can handle it. In my mind, it just clears the deck from the obvious, or the ones I haven't thought of that I want to have a list of. And investors keep checklists too. I think it's very helpful so that you can focus on what's going on once all of it is out of the way. And if you can do that, then you can course correct. I think a doctor in ER who shows up every morning and has a different protocol and procedure, and on top of it has to course correct. It's like a pilot that's put in a plane he never flew without a checklist, not knowing where the switches are. Like that's
Yeah. The other thing that I notice with both groups, and again, this is a consistent trait of those that deal in the crisis environment a lot, is they're brilliant at creating slack.
I like that.
Choosing things not to focus on. Mm-hmm. So if you think about the whole triage experience, triage is deciding what must be prioritized over other things. Mm-hmm. And even if you look at an emergency room, not everyone gets dealt with first. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that process is becomes so vital is it gives people additional cognitive bandwidth to focus on what matters most in that moment. They will eventually get to the things that could be important, but for now, they're dealing with the things they know are important. I sit on the investment committee for a hospital system, a nonprofit hospital system. And one of the things that I so respect is that when COVID hit, they took risk out of their investment portfolio deliberately. And the point was, we cannot spend our time focusing on running a healthcare system and dealing with an investment portfolio that's struggling. So let's just set that, fix it. Mm-hmm. We'll come back to it. Yes, we may miss the best 3 months in history, but now we can use all of our attention on the things that matter. And I think sometimes that is something that people need to do more, is to look at your stacked vulnerabilities to say, okay, where can I create slack? What can I say? I will get to this at a future time because my attention needs to be here.
Mm-hmm. You're touching on a couple of fascinating points. One is when we think of risk, and the word means different things to different people, but I'm thinking how in life, when you're starting a business, then you want to make sure that your family life is peaceful and quiet, and you have some assets, some money saved. You create risk in one place, but you try to de-risk the other places, right? You don't go, and hopefully, I know it happens to people that they get a divorce, start a new business, and deplete all the assets at the same time. I don't wish it on anybody, but you kind of choose your battles in a way, like a general, right? If you're going to create more risk, like the hospital didn't ask for it, but there was a risk coming in, unexpected. They wanted to remove risk from the other aspects of their existence. I think it's fascinating that you don't have to take all of it on you at the same time. That really helps. And I like the idea of slack. And I talk about it and write about it, how, my work is very structured, but then I have those days and hours where if something comes up, I can handle it. If a client has a one-off request, I can spend half a day focusing on that one thing. If my entire day was auctioned off, scheduled and gone, I wouldn't have that slack. And I have to be available. The same way a pilot has to drop everything and be available when the engine starts to sputter.
Yeah,
and 100% attention.
Yeah, and so by design, we don't allow pilots to do certain things before they fly. We give them legitimate time off. Mm-hmm. So there is structured slack for a reason. You know, I think generationally, we've been raised with this idea of get out of your comfort zone.
Right.
When you're experiencing lots of stress and anxiety, you need to get into your comfort zone to replenish, to restore, to deliberately schedule time where you have this sense of fluency to just relax and find it easy.
Right.
And that's not working out. You know, one of the things that I say to folks is, if you feel like crap because you didn't do it that day, that's not your comfort zone.
That's true.
The punishment of not doing it shouldn't be so intense that you're beating up on yourself. You know, your comfort zone is a place that is truly relaxing. There's no measurement. It's time should pass quickly, but people need to find it.
I do want to ask you about the time horizon changing, but you brought up something that reminds me of a quote, and I'm looking at the quote now from your book. You say that confidence dramatically alters our basic cognitive processes, and I added a note for myself. We know what to say, we know what to do. And that's exactly what you said. If you realize that you're choosing workout and you feel bad about not doing it, it's not your comfort zone. Being honest with yourself, that's not your comfort zone. You have to find something else, whether it's a walk or yoga or meditation, whatever it is, but it's not what you thought it is. Let's talk about time. You have this beautiful idea that you brought up earlier that I want to expand on. You say how our world shrinks and expands based on our mood. And again, when I'm embracing your model, it's very dynamic. It adjusts over time. So it's not that we're always this way or always that way. And I think it's very true in life and in investing. You brought up stories from 2021 when we went from the world is about to end to the world will never end and the future is very beautiful and rosy. Can you talk about it? I thought it was the best example in the last half a decade of a massive expansion. And at first we shrunk the horizon and then we expanded it almost beyond the limits of our imagination. Walk me through it. What happened to us?
Yeah, so intense vulnerability forces us to focus. And we think of focus as an intense look at something. But I think the better way is to say, no, focus is the elimination of attention anywhere else but there. That what we do is we blur everything around us. And physiologically, we actually do that, but unknowingly. Our eyes dilate. And if you're a photographer, you know that if I dilate, expand the diaphragm, I create this beautiful blurring of what's in the background. It's the portrait feature on your phone versus the picture feature.
Right.
And that happens in multiple dimensions. So when my confidence is low, my sense of physical distance changes. So what's 10 feet away might as well be 10 miles away. Distances, if you're a hiker, hiking up at a hill, a mile feels different from hiking a mile down a hill. That our sense of distance grows when confidence falls. And so we need to push distance away. The bear is outside my tent. But we do the same thing in terms of time. I care about now, not then. I care about me, not you. There's a relational, social aspect. And what is related to all of those is there is tangibility to what is right around me versus hypotheticality, abstraction, to what is far away from me. And in a crisis, all I care about is that me here now tangibility. It's why we hoard cash. It's putting putting our money under the bed is truly me here now money management in an intense crisis. It's why we drain the banks. It's why we run to Costco and pull out all the water and the wipes and everything else. So that hoarding instinct is something that transcends us socially, temporally, physically. But when confidence expands, when we feel confident, right, that's when we go to the moon. That's when we're investing intergenerationally, because we believe that the future is so clear and so certain that we better prepare and plan for it. And we embrace abstraction. And that's what, to me, defined 2021 and early 20 was that was a bubble in extreme abstraction, from SPACs to NFTs to crypto to space to EVs. Everything we wanted was wild possibility.
And a lot of it was just a dream that was not here to last.
No, but we love those wild the more outlandish the dream, when confidence is high, the more it seduces us, the more we're drawn to it.
It's fascinating because when you talked about intergenerational, multi-generational, I work with families that have had wealth for multiple generations, and I work with families that aspire to have their wealth last multiple generations. And different conclusions can be drawn from it. You could say, oh, they can take very, very high risks. And I say not really, because it's the money they can't afford to lose. They can't make it back. They have a very clear understanding, but deep to their bone, that they might not be able to make that money back. So some ideas are off the table. And I was very impressed how clients I work with, responded to the frenzy of 2021 and did not want to participate in a lot of the hottest topics of the day. But I do know people that gave in to that promise and did what you just said. So followed businesses with no profits. On top of it, locked up the assets for many years in all kinds of products that became available, right? Because you think that you don't need this money for so long, then you can take higher risks. And they believed in stories that would have been unbelievable any other time. Somehow as humanity, we can't hold on to this slow and steady approach as a whole. As individuals, maybe we could, and we aspire to, at least that's my aspiration. But as a whole, somehow we fail to do that. We either go one way or the other all the time.
No, that's why you should always pull people individually rather than a group. The average guess is going to be better than the guess of the crowd. There's all sorts of fun case studies in that. But if we know where we are, where the crowd is, more importantly, I think as an investor, where is the crowd? Then you can appreciate the unbelievableness of the stories, particularly at both extremes. Because ideally, we should be taking more risk when we believe there's no tomorrow. And to be comfortable that when the building is on fire, that is the time to encourage risk-taking rather than to retreat from it. That getting comfortable, if I know where the crowd is, and I can, the headlines will be large and bold like they were the other day, markets in chaos, markets in turmoil. Those are giving me pretty good clues that the crowd is in the stress center. And I know from experience it can't linger there, because again, our actions will be impulsive and emotional to get out.
I'll have to write it down. Take more risks if there is no tomorrow. Because if there is no tomorrow, then the risks won't be due, right? Like, that's my thinking. If there is tomorrow.
Yeah, I always joke that panic is God's way of telling us that the worst is behind us.
I like that. Oh, that's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, the worst is behind us. It's fascinating. It's a very emotional game, because when you really look at what we're trying to do, I'd love to own a collection of businesses that are doing something useful that people want, and their profits that follow, and I get to be a shareholder in these businesses, simply put, right? But I operate in a world where these businesses are publicly traded, so they have a price every single minute of the day. I don't even know how much they moved since we started talking. I'll look later. I'm curious because today is an exciting day. But the point is that Buffett says you could turn it off and not check on it. For a few years, you're an owner, but we don't actually do that. And when you manage other people's money, you take on also their emotional experience of it. That's why I wrote that email to clients last night, because I thought, I know that I'm fine with it. I just want to make sure that they're fine with it. I felt like that pilot that just makes an announcement, and this is just a go around. But it's fascinating how you can't eliminate that emotion from almost any decision. Even when you're buying a house, it's an emotional decision. Everybody in your family bought a house you haven't, you have to rush in. It's always emotional. It's never just a numbers game. So it's fascinating to explore where you are on your map. And related to that, I want to ask you, the map kind of gives us the awareness, and it's an invitation to be more aware of where you are. But tell me more how we can use that map the best way. Are there parts that we should be in and we're not in? Are there parts that we find ourselves in but we maybe shouldn't be in? Is that how you look at it too?
Yeah, I guess I look at life moving us around, and that ideally we want to get comfortable in all four of these boxes. I think that defines being resilient, is your ability to tolerate all of the boxes. It may not be enjoyable, some of the time, but you can do this. You can deal with uncertainty. You can deal with powerlessness. And this is where the action comes from, because certainty and control are all things that there's always something we can do to regain it. So if I'm feeling powerless, and I've worked with coaches, when a player comes off the field, the question isn't, you didn't look good out there. It's, what do you need to feel more certain? What do you need to feel more in control? And that opens up a dialogue that is very revealing in terms of the sources of discomfort. I feel out of control because of this. And so the question is that something you can deal with directly, or do you need to create slack elsewhere so that you have the bandwidth to continue to confront that? I write in the book, and it was the most difficult paragraph for me to put in the book, in that we can blame others for putting us in the passenger seat, but it is our choice to stay there. And staying in the passenger seat is ultimately on us. So if I'm going to leave the passenger seat, what do I need to do to prepare? Because leaving the passenger seat means swapping control or powerlessness for control, but also swapping certainty for uncertainty. So how do I need to prepare for the uncertainty that I'm going to experience when I take control in the launch pad? And there, it could be gaining new skills, setting aside, some money to be able to handle it, jumping with friends, finding a cohort that we're going to do this together. But we need to appreciate that if we're going to commit to leaving the passenger seat, it's about preparation. You can't just run into the cockpit and fly the plane. You're going to need to know how to do that.
There are stories of people that were forced to land planes that had no prior experience flying, so it has happened. I don't wish it on anybody, but it has happened, and they landed planes. And in life, we find ourselves in situations where we were not prepared for it, but if we can. I really like that sentence that you said, that there's always something you can do to regain control, right? There are moments where we feel like it's hopeless, helpless, I can't do anything. There's always the smallest thing that you can do to start regaining control. And we felt it in March of 2020 on a big scale, and I think we feel it in different moments in time in our everyday life, but that we can start to regain control. And I like the other point that you made, that it's our choice to stay there, wherever there it is. And you don't have to. Before I ask you about your definition of success, which is one of my favorite questions, I do want to ask you about the launchpad. And you mentioned in your book how entrepreneurs crave a chance to be behind the wheel. Tell me more about that. Which part do they crave and why?
So I can remember a couple of years ago, I spoke to an EO group, which is Entrepreneurs Organization. It's like YPO, presidents. And I was talking about the 4 boxes and how much we love the comfort zone. And I'm seeing this unease in the audience. It's like, okay, I'll bite. What's going on? And they're like, we hate that comfort zone. It's boring. It's dull. It's like, we love the launch pad. Because for them, what others see as risk, they see as possibility. But they also will tell you that they're the ones to realize it. So they have to have their hand on the steering wheel, and they have to have a foot on the gas or the brake, but they're going to drive. And if you've worked for an entrepreneur, you know that you're going to be in the passenger seat, and at times there's going to be some whiplash. So you better be comfortable with change, because they're going to change. To your point earlier about, okay, we're just going to change the way we do this. Their entrepreneurs are often like emergency room doctors. They're completely comfortable changing routine because it's not achieving the goals that they want.
I think it's a wonderful way to describe it, and it's kind of a self-revelation of where you are. And at different points in time, we're in different parts of the map, and the one that you just described, the launchpad as well. I worked at one firm for 11 years, and I was definitely in a passenger seat. I was made partner and so on, but I never really felt like I have the kind of control that founder or an entrepreneur would. Then I was a co-founder for many years, and now I launched my own investment firm 5 months ago. And I can definitely tell you that your launchpad narrative in the book is very accurate.
Yeah.
Both hands on the wheel, and it's a ride, but it's exhilarating, it's different, and that's where you grow. But I understand that it takes time to prepare. You talk about preparation to feel comfortable in that new seat, and it's better to go in with some prior experience.
Yeah, and I think of it as the difference between the classroom and the lab, or the classroom and the internship. We have a lot of passive learning that takes place in the passenger seat, but experiential learning that I'm learning by doing is vital. And sadly, if I think about the post 9/11 generation, whose parents instilled in them this need to be safe, they didn't get those experiences in the launch pad where there was failure. That you were in the launch pad and you hit the stress center, but you figured it out. You learned how to get out of the stress center, having not succeeded. And so I wish for this new generation to encourage parents, keep your kids in the launch pad. Let them figure it out, because those are life skills that are invaluable.
So obviously everybody reading the book will think of their own stories. As I was reading your book, I was thinking of myself. I went to a good school in Poland, and I got my university degree, and I could have stayed. And the school was very recognized in Poland. I could have easily gotten a job in the private or public sector, and very easily. But I thought, no, I'm going to continue to learn French and go study in Paris instead, where my school is completely unknown. And then I got a degree from a good school in Paris, and people told me, well, this is your last stop. With this degree, you can get a good job in Paris. And I had some really, really interesting offers to stay in Paris. And I thought, no, I'm going to go to New York, where neither of the two schools are known or recognized. And I started a career in the investment profession, at some point sitting at a big, big table, the only person not born in the US recommending a stock idea. That's where I found myself. So reading your book, I realized I forced myself to a launch pad, again and again and again in my life because I thought that there's more. If anything, I thought that staying where I was a bigger risk than looking at the possibility, opportunity in front of me. I thought, I don't want to live a life of regret thinking, oh, I wish I tried it. I want to try it and then realize, oh, this was actually it. And it's fascinating. I don't know where it came from, but it was always, a degree of preparation and some sort of risk taking. But I thought that the alternative was not exciting enough. So I can relate to the room you were speaking to. They didn't want to be in that.
And you grew it on a larger and larger launch pad. Your
True.
world expanded. You were able to continue to grow the size of your world.
Very much so. And it's fascinating because, looking back, it sounds like a very obvious path that I took. But in those moments, there were 1,000 other options to take and to actually follow through and take the one that other people told me, this looks risky. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to listen to the voice inside that tells you, I think this is exactly where you should go. Peter, I want to ask you about the definition of success. I'm very, very curious, given the research you've done, a wonderful career that you're having, and this book, this map that you just placed in front of all of us today. How do you look at your life and you think about your definition of success?
So my definition of success has changed in my life.
Mm-hmm.
As a young man, success was defined as my success.
Mm-hmm.
And then as my career grew and my family grew, it was about our success.
Mm.
And today, I think of success as their success.
Mm.
That I obviously a function of age and experience, but my goal, my interest now is all about helping others to succeed in their lives, whether it's my students in the classroom or the organizations that I work with, but it's no longer about me. Mm-hmm. It's how do I take what I've learned and experienced to help others to be more successful in their lives.
Would you call it planting trees for others to enjoy?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the greatest joys in my career was sitting on a bench with a gentleman named Roger Milliken. Mm-hmm. And Roger at that point was in his 80s. He had grown Milliken Textiles, business that he and his siblings had inherited. And listening to him talk, he was talking about planting acorns. Uh-huh. And not only in the literal sense, because they had a wonderful arboretum and beautiful campus, mm-hmm. but in the business. And knowing that what he was planting were things that he would never see the fruit of. And I think that's vital. And if I look at the people who are older than me who model what I aspire to be, mm-hmm. they are doing that. It's not about them. It's about helping a next generation to succeed.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way of looking at it, and a book like yours is a gift for generations to come. People will be coming back to this book. It's an evergreen, everlasting book that people can relate to years from now. And I like that idea of, leaving something behind and you won't see the benefits of it. And it really resonates with me given the work that I do. I manage money for families, and I know that they look at the capital that I'm responsible for as the capital that will serve not necessarily them at this point, but the next generations. And to think that way in a world that day to day tells us to panic and get enthusiastic and shocked. And I think it's a really refreshing and eye-opening and kind of slow and steady, calm way, unrushed way of looking at things and building something that can last. It's very different than trying to impress somebody by Friday. It's a very different way of looking at success. And I like that expansion that you describe, which rhymes with the stories in your book from, just you to your family and everybody else that gets to spend time with you, including me today, one more time, and with my audience that I'm sure will be delighted to learn from you, explore your book, and everything that you share out there. So I want to thank you so much for today. This was such a wonderful conversation. And I had some questions, but we took it in so many different directions that it felt very natural and organic just to explore. And I know that we just scratched the surface because there's so much more in the book and in your mind that I think you could share. So maybe we'll do a repeat at some point and dive in even deeper. But Peter,
I would look forward to that.
Thank you so much for today.
Thank you. It's been a blast. Thank you.
You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski.